Q, Q, Q. Hello, everybody. Recording live from somewhere. This is Zach Couples with episode number 10. We've already hit double figures. Well done of the movement debrief. Thank you guys for joining. Today we're going to talk about three things. Lat stretch. What position should your arm be in? That's number one. Number two, general versus specific exercise. And the last one, number three, staying neutral. Stay tuned. A little bit of housekeeping before we dive into things. First and foremost, did you guys check out the blog this past week? This time it was another podcast I did with my good buddy, Douglas. So glad you're here, Kachijan. We discussed my sleep initiative. Ryan Tran, I missed you too, my guy. We discussed my sleep initiative that I did with the NBID League, and we went into a little bit different details than what I went into in my blog post that I did previously. And we had a good conversation about diving into, putting these things together, eliciting behavior change, and persuading coaching staff in terms of implementing things that essentially killed some sacred cows. So it was a lot of fun. I enjoyed talking with Doug always, and it just felt like another conversation that we typically had, albeit a bit more formal. So go ahead and check that out. That's really all I have for housekeeping. Exciting thing though, this weekend I get to go to the Hamptons, hang out with my peeps, and we get to learn from Derek Hansen. So that's going to be in the docket. At some point I'm going to review a little course that he's putting together for us. So I'm really excited to meet the guy. I've never met him, and I'm more excited to learn from him. And I wish I would have had his class this past week, because I was actually teaching sprinting with someone, and it would have been helpful to be really, really good at that, where I'm okay at that. That's because I learned from these guys, who are also very smart, and they're in Phoenix. Anyway, debrief question number one. This is all today going to be Q&A from readers, so it's going to be something a little bit different. But a lot of people ask some good questions. So, question one. This is regarding a lat stretch. So, Rohan, or Ro as he goes by writes, I mentioned that the lat stretch works better with the arm in internal rotation. And so what I did was a doorway stretch pulling back this way. This contradicts a video by someone on the interwebs, although a lot of people on the interwebs, who want the arm in external rotation to stretch the lats. What's your rationale? Great question, Rohan. So, if we think about what the lats do, and I totally get and understand why some individuals would coach a lat stretch in that position there, external rotation. And the reason why it's advocated that way is because the lats are an internal rotator. And so if you want to maximally lengthen the lats, well, you got to flex them, put them in abduction, and externally rotate the humerus. So, Zach, why on the post that I did, how to treat pain in sitting, a case report, did I internally rotate the arm? It's a phenomenal question. And if you want to directly stretch the lats, yeah, probably should put it into external rotation. Here's something I want you to consider, though. What is the action of the latissimus dorsi on the trunk? Remember, all muscles are triplanar, and there's actions and connections and movements that, given their attachments at the thoracolumbar fascia, that the lats do to the trunk. And so what it will do is it will contralaterally rotate, but it will also ipsilaterally side bend. If you take up full slack with external rotation, and you tighten up the lat at all three planes at the attachment of the humerus, you lessen the capability that you can create excursion in the trunk. And so when I'm doing that stretch, a doorway stretch with the arm internally rotated, it seems as though, and a lot of this is based on anecdotal use, that when I internally rotate, that allows me to reach a little bit farther, as well as allow for a little bit more contralateral side bending in the trunk. Because when I do that stretch in particular, I'm not just looking to stretch the lats or inhibit the lats. I'm also looking to inhibit the intercostals with a breath. So when I'm here like this holding on to something and I take a breath of air in, my hope is that those intercostals allow for the ribs to expand laterally and a bit upwardly, so opening up that way, as well as the lat stretch. If I twist my hand so it's this way, I can't side bend as far as if I do the internally rotated position. So it doesn't allow for as much of an active reach. If I can't do an active reach and side bend away on that stretch, then I can't get an effective rib cage position or zone of apposition on the contralateral side. Now we also know that the lats can drive the thorax into extension. And if I'm here and I tighten it up in 3 spots on the shoulder, that may limit my capability of achieving that zone of apposition and creating thoracic flexion that's necessary to inhibit the lats. So it is those reasons why I put the arm in internal rotation on the lat stretch. Moreover, it's just because it's not just a lat stretch. I want you guys to think of that mobilization not just as something to achieve overhead flexion and inhibit lats, but as something to expand frontal plane mobility of the thorax and the pelvis for that matter. And in order to do that, you got to stretch more than just a lat. So that's why I do that position over the externally rotated. But what I would say, guys, because again, I don't have a lick of evidence to support that aside from anecdotal experience, try it, both, see which one you get a better stretch on, and use that. So there is the lat debate. Question 2. This is from Jason. This is regarding general versus individualized exercise programs. And Jason writes, overlooking the basics really hit home for me. So this was a discussion I had talked about on one of the previous movement debriefs about mastering your basics before you get too wild and crazy. What struck me even harder was when I was pleasantly surprised in the fact that this patient that I discussed about on a previous movement debrief was getting improvements from staple exercise. Do we need specific exercise if general works? That's a really phenomenal question. I had to think a lot about this one. Here's the problem with this, and I won't say the problem with this question, but the problem with this debate of general versus specific exercise. Do we have a blanket definition of what constitutes a general program? That's question 1. And to that, I mean, if you look at some of the research on any condition and an exercise program is prescribed, there is nothing that is typically standardized for a given pathology. 2 researchers could perform slightly different things for a given injury. And so, what is general? I don't know what that means, right? So, in that sense, the fact that we don't have a definition of general exercise, I don't know if we can apply a general exercise program. That said, let's just say that we can apply some type of general exercise program, and what that is, and where I would say that this is something that everyone could benefit from to some degree, or where you're doing something where it's not super duper individually tailored. If you can coach your individuals to performing the basic movements of a squat pattern, a hip hinge pattern, a push pattern, a pull pattern, and either some type of loaded carry or some type of core exercise, then I think that type of program is something that can be applied to most everyone to some degree, and it's something we should all strive for. And you'll hit the lowest common denominator with that type of program. This is especially so if you have an individual who's got a low training age or is young. I mean, with these types of people, we don't need to get super duper specific with our programming or tailoring a rehab program necessarily, because just generally movement is good and they haven't developed pathologies, or their body hasn't accommodated into a certain position that would render individual attention. So I think in those cases we should strive to coaching everyone to basic movement patterns. And generally, if you have someone who's a younger training age or just a young child in general, probably don't need to get super duper specific. That said, if you're going to just apply blanket general exercise to someone, you're going to get general results. What if I have someone who has a specific goal in mind? And maybe that goal is to get out of pain. Or maybe that goal is to play high-level sports. Or maybe that goal is hitting 1,500 total powerlifting numbers. If we have specific adaptations that we are trying to achieve, then that's probably going to need a more specific and individualized program. I've been reading a lot of Charlie Francis lately to prep for Derek's course, and there's a couple quotes that I'm going to steal from him. A program should reflect one's capabilities. That's number one. Let's talk about that a little bit. So if I have an individual who's in pain, and I apply a general exercise program, what if a movement that typically someone should do, say maybe a push-up, hurts? What are you going to do? It's a general exercise program, right? Well, you're going to have to make some accommodations for that individual. Another example, what if I have someone who has to do Olympic lifts, as an example? In that case, a general exercise program is not going to be effective for them. You're going to have to do things specifically tailored to improve the Olympic lift. So we have to prescribe exercise in such a manner that if there is a goal we're intending to achieve, it has to support the goal. I also think, too, another quote that I have from Charlie Francis, is that with general programs, we are hitting the lowest common denominator. And this is true of anything, like if we do a diet book, for example, you're going to prescribe that diet in such a manner that it helps most people. But there's going to be people at either end of the spectrum that diet won't help. And so what do you do for those people? In those cases, a general program is not going to be helpful for them. So we have to be specific in that regard. Overarching all this, regardless of if you are applying some type of general program or some type of specific program, coaching is at the paramount regardless of what you do. Just because you know that this move is good for someone, if you're not coaching the hell out of it and it's putting them in a bad position, you're not going to win, regardless of what type of program you implement. And so Jason mentioned this woman that I had worked with where she has had several knee surgeries and is very much dealing with a lot of fear avoidance and hesitancy, and wanted to follow a protocol that was instructed upon by her physician and the previous physical therapist that she worked with, right? And I definitely went through with it because I'm going to do what this woman feels best, especially given all that she's been through. And so we did this, right? But if you look at what a lot of the pictures look like in this thing, and this is going to be relevant to because where she's at right now, this stuff is not coached pretty. Sorry. Like, it's just not coached pretty whatsoever. Like, we were supposed to introduce knee bends today, which is squatting, or not today, but the other day. And the position that the individual was squatting in who was demonstrating it was a little bit of this kind of thing. You know, you're doing the J-Lo, and you're trying to keep a vertical tibia, which you don't do on a squat. Sorry for your vertical tibia people. And it's like, what the hell are you doing, right? And while general exercise may have helped this individual now, I can tell you right now, she's having a very hard time performing a squat without pain. Per her protocol, she's supposed to do an active straight leg raise. Well, that hurts, and she has a severe lag. When she tries to do the hamstring exercises that are prescribed, they're too challenging, and so what does she do? Instead of kicking in hamstring, she extends her back. So it's like, even though we have a general program in place, we have someone in this case who is outside of the mean, or the standard deviation of 1. And in that case, we have to do specific things in order to help this woman. And so what did I do for her? Well, I'm glad you asked. So instead of having her try to force through that straight leg raise, and yeah, it hurts, blah, blah, blah. She also has pain with her quadricep, by the way. I gave her a different activity that was outside of what was prescribed. I regressed the hamstring activity so she could get a little bit more hamstring activation in a pain-free position. And lo and behold, when we did that, she was able to perform a quad set without pain. Moreover, when we did the deep knee bends, I didn't coach them the way that that person or that therapist had it in the program. Instead, I made sure that she was in a good trunk position, and she pushed her knees forward while maintaining heel contact, and she was able to do the squat with a lot less pain. Now, believe me, we still got a ways to go, and you know, there's other variations I think I want to try with this woman. But the point being is, just because you think this exercise, and this exercise are the standard of care, and maybe the research shows that this is the most effective in this program or for this certain instance, or maybe, I don't know, you know, squatting is good for jumping, or whatever the hell it is, it doesn't really matter. If you're not coaching the hell out of what you're doing, the argument between general and specific exercise is a moot point. So, to summarize that, I think there are general movements that everyone can benefit from. I do think, though, that individualization is critical, especially when you have someone where that standard deviation doesn't help them. And I think this is especially true in individuals who are experiencing pain. And regardless of what you're doing, you better be coaching the hell out of it. And you better be making changes that are not meaningful just to your testing, but meaningful to whoever you're working with. And whether that's performance testing or rehabilitation testing. So, there's that. The last question. This is from Mark. I'm going to need a drink after this one. Mark writes, it seems that it's a common challenge for individuals is to maintain neutral. So that's a PRI term. So, for example, a lot of blog posts will say, why give mobility if you can't use it? Or, once you're neutral, you've just begun. What is it that you find helps people stay neutral? That was his question. So, let's talk about what neutral means. And I think there's a lot of different definitions that we're going to go by. In this case, Mark was referring to the definition that PRI advocates. And so what they say neutral is a position of rest, a state of rest. It's a transition zone from going from one part of range of motion to another. So in the gait cycle, for example, the neutral position would be mid-stance. From a testing standpoint, there's 4, 5 kind of key tests that PRI looks at to determine if someone is neutral or not. And so Can you adduct your hip? This would be, as PRI calls it, an adduction drop test, which is basically your Ober's test. Can you rotate your trunk? That's looking at shoulder horizontal abduction. Can you turn and side bend your neck? So cervical axial rotation and mid-cervical side bending. And then if you go the PRI vision route, can I center over my left leg, which would be that position there, essentially. For you Facebook people, because I know it's a little bit of a funky angle, that position there. You got someone who can do those things, they're probably neutral. But here's the thing with that. Here's the dirty little secret, people. I don't think neutral is the goal. And you're not always going to be neutral. I might go even so far to say that being alternating, thank you, Colin, my short game is on point, right? Neutral's not the goal. Alternating and reciprocal isn't the goal. You are going to wax and wane out of both of these things. And for those who don't know what alternating and reciprocal means, that means being able to do one thing on one side and then the exact opposite thing on the other side, and being able to alternate that. What the goal is whatever your goal is, right? Whether that's movement, whether that's some type of fitness goal, whether that is being healthy to play with your grandkids when you're 80. That's the goal. The goal is to be able to get that and do whatever it takes to be able to achieve that goal. Neutral is something that's going to wax and wane and that a lot of us won't ever achieve unless we go to drastic means. And even then, because you're looking at a guy who's went to drastic means to try and do that. Still not internally rotating that humerus. I can't always adduct my hips. And that's okay, because I'm meeting my goals. Where I'm at with this game, and that's PRI, and that's just movement in general, is when we're talking about getting someone neutral or improving functional testing, I think we only need to do that insofar as it helps someone achieve a desired activity, whether that's moving pain-free, whether that's being able to perform a split squat, whether that's being able to play high-level basketball. The question that we have to ask is not how can we maintain neutral, is that the question is, thank you, Charlie. The question is, how far is neutrality or joint position or fitness or all of these things the rate limiting step for whatever it is I'm trying to do? And so let me give you an example. Let's say it hurts for me to go overhead. If I have a limitation in internal rotation on that side, or external, or whatever, it doesn't really matter what position that is, and then I also have some type of limitation somewhere else, I may do interventions that target trying to get me to neutrality insofar as that it allows me to move overhead without pain. In that case, it's likely that joint position is a rate limiting step to some degree. And so I'm going to do whatever I can to address that. Once that it's addressed and you've established enough, and I'm going to call it this, movement variability, then you need to move on to building other qualities that ensure that you can continue to do this. And I think one thing that a lot of us overlook, and this is actually something I'm going to talk about in next Monday's blog post, stay tuned. It's a long one and it's going to be a good one, is we need to address other capacities besides movement variability or neutrality or joint position. We need to be able to address power, which is being able to generate force or tolerate load. We need to also be able to generate or to address capacity, which is being able to do something for an extended period of time. Building fitness with these qualities is what I think you can have have the capability of meeting your goals despite maybe not being able to maintain a neutral joint position. Moreover, to go back to neutrality, because this is one thing where I kind of struggle with this term and with neutral. We might be able to have someone test neutral on a table, but how can we tell that they're able to be in or use that range of motion, or they're able to achieve those joint positions in something that's a completely different context? Or moreover, I may have someone who can't get neutral on a table, but how do we know that they're not in a neutral or an ideal joint position on some other activity? I mean, that's the crux of how we change a lot of those tests on the table, is we put someone in a joint position that's not on the table, and we have them breathe, and then lo and behold, that often changes joint position. So why couldn't it be the case that I might have someone who can be in a great joint position in split stance, or when they're playing basketball, or when they're singing on stage? I mean, I don't really care what it is, but maybe they're not that case on the table. And the reason why that is because it's a different context. The way I am in position A doesn't necessarily mean that it's going to correlate to position B, whatever those two things are. And so the fact that I might not be able to do something in one doesn't mean that I can't do that in something else. And again, this goes to the point where I think a lot of us who've gone down the rabbit hole towards neutrality, and I'm guilty of this, is we try to change particular tests for the sake of particular test change. And if we're doing that without an overarching goal in mind of either establishing health or establishing performance, we're wasting time. We're asking the wrong questions. The questions we need to ask is, how can I live a full, healthy life? Or how can I live out my dreams, which is what Moshe Feldenkrais defines as health? How can I perform at the highest level possible? And maybe I'm sacrificing health in order to do that. Those are the questions that need to be asked. And what we need to do is address the rate-limiting steps that are impeding me from achieving that goal. Whether that's neutrality or movement variability, whether that's power, whether that's capacity, whether that's sleep, whether that's nutrition, whether that's stress management, whether that's having a better relationship with your family. We have to look at more variables that we need to address aside from just joint position. And we need to address all of those. And I think that's going to be calling it in for tonight. That's a good stopping point. Thank you guys so much for listening. I also appreciate the compliments on not just the shorts game, Colin, but also Charlie Reed, patio furniture. I wish I could say it was mine, but this patio, man, this is where I get my shit done. So thank you guys for listening. If you want to learn more from me, obviously, you can follow me on Facebook Live. That's you guys right here. Or Facebook/ZCouples. You can get me on that IG, Zach, ZAC Couples. You can follow me on YouTube. Just search Zach Couples. I'm also on Twitter, @ZCouples. Go to my website, ZachCouples.com. You can also subscribe to my newsletter there. And I'm doing something, you guys don't know about this, but I'm doing something for my newsletter peeps that you guys can't get if you're on the other stuff. And that's weekend goodies to learn. And so what I'm doing for that, something new, is I am compiling all the stuff that I've come across in a week, and I'm giving it to my newsletter people. So if you want to be a part of that, go to my website, sign up on my newsletter. You can also get a free acute to chronic workload calculator, and moreover, you can also get a podcast or two that I have done with some peeps. Otherwise, you guys stay classy, keep it cool, keep it real, but not to the extent where things go wrong, and stay hungry, stay strong, keep moving, keep learning, and I'll see you guys next week. Deuces.